In this video, we'll build a responsive HTML email template with tables. Okay guys, so I'm excited to share this HTML email template design with you. So my goal for this video is to get up to 500 likes. And if you end up liking the video, remember to subscribe and turn on your notifications for new tutorials. So the best way to tell if an HTML email template will be responsive is to simply size the window up and down in Gmail. And if it responds in Gmail, that will tell us that it will be responsive on mobile devices like the iPhone. And to show you what you can expect on mobile devices, here I am on my iPhone in the Apple Mail app, and as you can see, the email template has gone from the 2-column layout into the single column layout. Then similarly, you can see how it will display in the Yahoo Mail app. Then in the Gmail app, you'll see that it's going to convert it to dark mode for us here without us designing for dark mode, which I'll cover in just a little bit. First, let's go over to Google Chrome, where I also have the email template open so we can get a better look at the responsiveness. So I'll open up the design using a responsive web design tester so we can see it on a smaller screen. And as you can see on the mobile version, the images in the 2-column section will be larger than at full width, which we'll be able to accomplish by styling our HTML tables using media queries. So the layout will include the social media icons, the logo, the banner image, the 2-column section with the images, text, and button, and then the 2-column image section underneath that with the logos, followed by the footer at the very bottom. So with that, the one thing that I'll cover before moving forward is you might notice that the banner image is an image itself without the text and the button on top of it. And the reason for that is because in order to have text and a button display on top of a background image properly in email clients, that would take up a large percentage of this video. And I'll cover a little bit more on email template compatibility, but first let me show you what we need to get started with the tutorial. In the description of this video will be a download link to the HTML email template starter files, including the index.html file, which I have open in the background in my text editor, then all of the images used to build the HTML email template, and also included is the HTML email course file where you can preview my complete HTML email mastery course, which I'll also have a discount link to in the video description. So the email template that we'll be building in the tutorial today is the light version of the project template inside of the HTML email mastery course. So while the template designs may look kind of similar, the compatibility will be very different between the course project and the template that we'll be building in the tutorial today. So the main difference between the course project and the project that we'll be building in the tutorial here on YouTube is we're not going to be designing for Outlook or Windows email clients. So in the tutorial version of the template, we won't be designing for Outlook or Windows compatible email clients, and we won't be adding dark mode specific styling in addition to some other compatibility aspects inside of the course project. So if you're interested in the HTML email mastery course, be sure to check out the link in the video description or by checking out the preview file included in the starter files download for the tutorial today. Okay, so with that, let's get started with the tutorial. So I'm going to be using the free program Visual Studio Code as my text editor, which I have open in the background. And if you'd like to get an introduction to the text editor, you can check out the resources page on my website, w3newbie.com, where I go over the extensions and some of the shortcuts that I'll be using in the tutorial. Okay, so now let's go over to Visual Studio Code. And the first thing that I'm going to do is go down to the lower right-hand corner to start the live server extension that's covered in the Visual Studio Code lesson that I just referenced. And once I hit go live, you'll see the gray background because we have the background color set to gray. So if I change this to white, you'll see live server changing the background color of the document that's open for us in Chrome. Okay, so I'm going to go back over to the completed version here in Chrome and just size the window down a little bit. And then let's go over what's already included for us in index.html, starting with the doc type at the top of the document. So the preferred doc type in HTML email is still XHTML 1.0 transitional, and while you may find some debate on the best HTML email doc type, email service providers and the large email client testing services still recommend XHTML. And moving on to the head section of the website where we'll have our internal CSS, we'll start off with content type and charset UTF-8, which is the standard character set for letters and numbers on the internet. Next, we have our compatibility meta tag for Microsoft Edge and Internet Explorer, followed by viewport with device width initial scale 1 for mobile devices. Then the title that you see underneath that, we don't necessarily need for our HTML email, but if you want a live version where people can view your HTML email template on the web, you can use the title as your title of that web page. Then we have our internal CSS style sheet right here with style type text CSS. And I'll also mention that some of our CSS will be adding inline with the HTML, and at the end of the tutorial, we'll use an inliner to make it so all of the CSS that we add internally here in the head section will also be inside of the HTML tags themselves. Then moving down to the CSS that's included for us already, we'll start off with margin 0, which is going to get rid of the space that would be above our template here in Chrome, and we already know about the background color that's set to gray. And then the other three mentions of border spacing, padding, and border 0 is to get rid of any inherent spacing and padding that email clients want to put on our email template design. And underneath that, we have our media query for the 600 pixel breakpoint, which is where our 2-column sections are going to turn into a single column with the first row of 2 columns as well as the logo row underneath them. Then moving back over to Visual Studio Code, the last bit of content here that I've added is just HTML comments inside of the body section, which are the different sections of the template that we'll be laying out, starting with the social media icons. But before we lay out our first table row, we'll need to make sure that our table is centered inside of email clients. So here, as you can see, when I span up the width, we have our email template centered. And to center the template, we're going to start off with the actual center tag, which is no longer valid in HTML5, but with older doc types in HTML email, it still works just as well. And we're also going to give our center tag a class that we'll call wrapper, so we can add some styling to it. And this center tag is going to wrap around all of our content. So we're going to move the closing center tag down underneath the footer section comment, and I'll add some indentation here to match it up with the first starting tag. And then we can add our main table tag, which will contain all of our table rows with the content inside of them. So underneath center, let's add the table tag, and we're going to give it a class called main. Then we're also going to make sure that it's aligned centered along with the center tag by saying align center. Then similar to the center tag, let's move the closing table tag to underneath all of the comments that are added for us already. And we'll add that above the center tag. And I'm going to indent this one more time to match the opening tag. So next, let's style these classes that we've added for the center and table tags inside of our internal CSS above, underneath the image tag where it says border 0. So we'll start off with the wrapper class, and we're going to give the wrapper class a width of 100% to make sure that it stays at 100% of the width when the document or email client flexes underneath the 600 pixel mark. So for example, if we take another look at Gmail, when we flex the window down, we want the wrapper content to display at 100% of the width, but we also don't want it to be any wider than the content that's inside of it, which is our table, which has the main class added to it. So what we're going to do in addition to having width 100% is we're going to add something called table layout fixed, which will, as I mentioned, make it so the wrapper itself won't be any wider than the table inside of it. Then we'll also add a background color set to gray with all C's for the hex value matching the body tag, because we don't want our email template to rely on the body styling in email clients for the background color. Then the last bit of styling that I'm going to add to the wrapper or center tag is to add some padding to the bottom. I like the look of a little space underneath the actual email template. So we're going to add padding bottom, which you can also see here in Chrome, aside from Gmail, of 40 pixels. So padding bottom, 40 pixels. And now we can move on to the styling of the main class for the table, which we added. So we'll add period for the class and then main. And we're going to center our table or reinforce the centering in addition to the center tag using margin 0 auto. Then we'll give our table a width of 100% so it displays at 100% underneath 600 pixels. And we'll give it a max width of 600 pixels, which is pretty much the standard width that you want to use for email templates, which will render properly across all email clients testable in the email client preview services. And once we have the max width set to 600 pixels, we can apply a background color to inside of the table itself. So we'll set this to white with all Fs, and that will give us some nice contrast with the gray background. Then we'll also set the border spacing to 0 to make sure that there's no borders displaying around our table, which might make space in between the table rows and the edge of the table. And we can also set a font family here. So I'm going to give this a font family of sans serif instead of Times New Roman, which I find a little bit softer on the eyes when reading the text. And for the color of the text, we're going to go with a dark gray shade instead of all zeros for black, which will be the hex value 4A, 4A, 4A. Okay, so with our table all set, we're ready to drop down to the social media icons comment to start off our first table row, including the icons that we see here. So each one of our sections of the template will start off with a table row tag, followed by our table data tag, which we have the padding set to 0 for already, and then a table tag inside of that. So with our table tag, we already have border spacing 0 set for that in our CSS, but we'll need to add width 100% to make sure that it takes up 100% of the table data tag that it's inside of for each one of our tables that we'll be adding. So now if we want to start to see our table take form, we can add any content here and check in Google Chrome to see that we have our centered table with the white background displaying. Then for the content inside of our table row here for the icons, we'll want to add styling around them. So we'll need a new set of table row and table data tags. Then the table data tag we'll be adding some styling to. First though, let's add our icons. So we're going to wrap them all with links, meaning the A tag, and then inside of the A tag we'll have the image for the icon. And I'm going to set the link to blank using the hashtag, but you could always link to your social media account here. Then for the icon, we'll need to reference the IMG folder and then circle-facebook.png for the first icon. So img/circle-facebook.png, and there we see the icon displaying, which we'll need to resize to match the original. So instead of using CSS to set the width for email clients, we'll need to use the width attribute, and then we'll add the width value inside of the attribute. So we'll say 32 for 32 pixels, and now you can see that the Facebook icon matches the original in size. So now since we have the first one set, all of the rest of the icons will be the same size and have the same HTML except for the image reference. So what we can do is simply copy this HTML, and I'll paste it underneath 4 times to make it so we have 5 icons in total, and then we can go about changing the images. So Twitter, then YouTube, LinkedIn, and Instagram. Okay, so now if we save it and take a look in Chrome, we'll have all of our 5 icons displaying, and now we can go about styling the icons row using the table data tag that it's nested inside of. So let's add our inline style here, starting with text align center, which will center our images because they're wrapped in links, and then we'll add the padding that we see around it. So we're going to add some padding to the top and bottom. So we'll say padding 8 pixels top, and then 0 left right, and 4 pixels bottom to match the original. And then what we can do is add the background color, which is sort of the light blue shade, complementing the green turquoise shade. And the hex value for the background color is EAF6FB. Then once that's set, let's add a border to the top and to the bottom. So we'll start with the top with border-top, and we're going to make the border on top 2 pixels, and then the bottom one will be a little bit thicker at 3 pixels. So we'll say 2 pixels solid, and then the green turquoise color will be 21C6B8 for the hex value. And what we can do for the border bottom is simply copy this CSS and paste it underneath. Then we'll change top to bottom and 2 pixels to 3 pixels. Okay, so once we save it, we have our styling complete. And if we go back and forth from the original to our version, we're not going to be able to tell the difference, at least with the social media icons row at the top. So let's drop down to the logo section next. And since we'll be adding styling around the logo image, we'll use the same layout of tags as we did with the social media icons, with the first set of table row, table data tags in the table, making our table 100% width. So we'll say width 100%. And then inside of our table, we'll add another set of table row and table data tags, which, as we know, we're going to use the table data tag for to add the styling once we have our logo image. So similar to the icons, let's start off with a link and then our image. And as an example here, I'll just add a link to my website instead of the hashtag, which is a blank link. Then we can add the logo image, which once again will be inside of the IMG image folder. And the logo is going to be the html-email.png file. So we'll say img/ and then html-email.png. Then for best practices, just for the logo image, we'll add alternative text to say logo, and then we can also add a title here that says logo. That way, when we hover over the logo image, we'll see the little text pop up where it says logo right there. And if for whatever reason the image doesn't display, we'll see logo appear as the alternative text. So I'll bring the image back and let's set a width of it to 300 pixels so it takes up half of the email template. And once we've done that, we can add our styling to the table data tag to make sure that our image is centered with text align center. And we'll also add some padding to the top and bottom, actually all around, just in case the device window is underneath or around 300 pixels, so we have some space off to the left and right. We'll add padding all around of 15 pixels. Okay, so now with the logo set, we're ready to drop down to the banner image, which will display at 100% of the width of the email template. So instead of layering the tables with the two separate sets of table row and table data tags, we only need one set here because the image inside of the table row and table data will take up 100% of the space. So we'll add the link and then the image, and the image here will simply be img/banner.jpg. Now, if we save it and take a look, the image is going to display outside of the template because it's more than 600 pixels. So what we'll do is add inline style here with the style attribute, and we'll set the width to a maximum width of 100%. So we'll say max width 100%. And then we can also set the width to 600 to match up with the size of the email template. So we'll say width 600. And once we save it, with that, we're ready to drop down to the 2-column responsive section of the template. So in order to achieve responsiveness and to resize the columns inside of the responsive section, we'll need to layer our tables a good bit more than we have in previous sections. So let's start off with our table row, table data, and table tag, which will give the width of 100% to using the width attribute. So width 100%. Then inside of the table, we'll have an additional set of table row and table data tags. And this set is meant to identify the number of columns that we'll be using inside of the section for CSS purposes. So although we're only going to be making 2-column sections with the responsive layout, we're going to call this 2 columns using the class for the table data tag. Then inside of this, we'll have a table for each one of the columns. So our first column will contain the image, the text, and the button, including the padding around it. And then the second column will be the second table that we'll be adding. And we're going to give this table a class called column. And inside of the table, we'll have an additional set of table row and table data tags. And this table data tag, we're going to apply the padding to, which surrounds our content, meaning the image and the text. So the padding is going to disappear when we size down underneath 600 pixels. but it's going to be there for the full width. So the padding space that we add will be replaced with the additional width to the image and the content underneath the breakpoint. So we'll give this a class that we'll simply call padding, and then inside of this we'll add our last table, which will be for the actual content, which, as I said, will be the image, text, and button. So we'll give this table a class called content to identify it. And now we can add our table row and table data, which will contain the actual content. So the first bit of content, being our image, will be similar to what we used previously with the TRTD and then the link with the image inside of it. So we'll say table row, table data, and inside of that we'll have our link followed by the image. And I'm going to leave the link blank. Then the image source will be inside of the image file, and it's going to be man-teal.jpg. So now if we save it and take a look, there we have our first image displaying. And for our image, we're going to give it a width of 260 pixels. So we'll start off with the width attribute. So we'll add width 260. And the reason for using 260 pixels is this is going to give us room for padding of 20 pixels on either side, which we'll be removing underneath the 600 pixel breakpoint. So it'll go from 260 to 300 pixels in width. So we're going to add style and max width 260 pixels, which will later change in the CSS media query for the 600 pixel breakpoint. Then for rounded corners, we'll add border radius 8 pixels to match the original. So now if we save it and take a look, we'll have a resized image with the border radius, and later we'll add the styling around it. But for now, let's drop down to the text content. So we'll add a new set of table row and table data tags. And I'm going to add a little bit of padding to the table data tag so our text content isn't quite as wide as the image by adding padding of 10 pixels all around. So we'll add style padding 10 pixels. Then inside of this TD tag, we can start off with our paragraph text for the build responsive emails text at the top. So I'll write build responsive emails. And then if we save it, we'll be able to see the text underneath, but it's not going to match the original. So let's increase the font size of the paragraph text. And I'm going to make this font size 17 pixels. And then we're going to also make it bold. So we'll say font weight bold, or you can say font weight 700. And that looks pretty good. So now we can add the paragraph text that appears underneath that as well. So we'll use a new paragraph tag to give us space between the two automatically. And then I'll paste the text content in. You can just add ipsum or lorem for dummy text in Visual Studio Code. And then before we get down to the button, let's add some space underneath this paragraph text. So I'm going to add style, then padding bottom 15 pixels. So now with the button, we're just going to add the class for the button inside of a link, and then we'll do all of our styling inside of the CSS in just a little bit. So we're going to give this link a class called button, and then for the text, we can write HTML email to match the original. So now if we save it, we're just going to see the link text there, and as I said, we'll style the button in just a few minutes. But first, now that we have all of our content laid out for the first column, what we could do is simply copy the actual table for the column and paste it underneath for our second column, then just adjust a little bit of the HTML to match the original second column in the template. So I'll paste this table in, and then what we can do to match the original is let's change the image to the woman, which is just going to be woman-teal instead of man-teal. Then we can move down to change the build responsive emails text to say create custom designs. And lastly, we'll change the button to say get started instead of HTML email. And I'll just make the G in get capitalized. Okay, so now we have all of our content set up and we can start styling our 2-column responsive section. So to add our styling, we're going to go right down the different classes that we added to this section, starting with the 2-columns class, and then we'll work our way down through the different classes that we see here. So let's go back up to the styling and reference the 2-columns class. And we're going to start off by adding font size 0. So this I'll be able to explain better in just a few moments, but this is going to temporarily do away with our font, and it's going to do away with spacing to the 2-columns table data tag once we add styling to different sections. Similarly, we'll add text align center, which will alter our text temporarily, but in just a moment we'll see that that will center our tables underneath 600 pixels. But before we move on to our table styling, let's add some padding to the top and bottom of our 2-column section. So I'm going to add padding, and if we take a look at the original, we have some space right here, as well as underneath the buttons. So we'll add 35 pixels to the top, 0 left, right, and 40 pixels to the bottom. So now we have some space around the section. So now we'll move on to the next class, and we'll start off by referencing the 2-columns class, and then we can reference the column class, which is for the table. So we'll just add column after that 2-columns class, and we're going to start by giving our columns a width of 100%. And since we're working with a 600 pixel template canvas, we're going to give this a maximum width of 300 pixels. And now with the width set, I can better explain the font size 0 set to the previous 2-columns class. So if we remove that, you'll see that we're going to have some space around our table. So I'll add that back so we have full control of the 600 pixel spacing with 300 for each table column. Then to get our tables displaying next to one another, we'll say display inline block. And now when we flex the window down, we'll also want to use vertical align top to make sure that the email clients respect the responsiveness on windows underneath 600 pixels. So now with our table styling set, I can show you without text align center, our tables are going to be positioned off to the left for the columns. And when we add it back, it's corrected. So now what we can do is drop down and add the padding using the padding class that we referenced to give it padding of 20 pixels all around. So let's say 2 columns and padding for that class. And as we know, with the images being 260, that leaves us with 40 pixels or 20 on either side. So once again, padding 20 pixels all around. So now if we save it, we should have the same spacing around the images as the finished version. And we're ready to move on to the content that appears underneath the images. So let's first off reference the content class, and we'll want to correct the font size that was taken away earlier with the styling. And I'm going to make the font size 15 pixels. And let's align our text to the left. And then I'm also going to increase the line height of our paragraph text to 20 pixels to space it apart a little bit. And that looks good and like the original. So now we're ready to style the buttons that appear underneath our paragraph text. So if you remember when we added the link for the button text, we gave it a class that was simply button. So all we need to do is reference that class itself in order to add our styling. So let's add our period for the class followed by button. And let's give it a background color first, which will be the hex value 1E5D7B for that dark blue shade. And with that set, we can set the color of the text to white with all Fs for the hex value. And then I'll take away the underline with text decoration none. And let's add some padding around the text of 12 pixels top bottom, 20 pixels left right. Then to match the images, we'll make the border radius 8 pixels as well. And then we can also make our text bold to match the original with font weight bold. Okay, so now if we save it, we should match up to the finished version, but I'm also going to add some letter spacing here. So let's space our letters apart with 1 pixel. That's a little much. Let's do 1/2 pixel. And that looks pretty good, just to separate it from the finished version. So now if we size the window down, we'll see that our columns are responsive as we know, but they're not going to match the original until we add the media query CSS later in the tutorial. But for now, let's move down to the next 2-column section, including the logo images. So though we're seeing 4 logos, if I open up Explorer here in the sidebar using Command B, we'll see that each image will contain 2 of the logos. So we're going to use a similar 2-column layout that we used in the section that we just created. With this section though, we're not going to use padding. So what we can do is simply copy our HTML above the padding class, and we'll paste that in to where we have the email icons comment added for us. And since we have vertical top-bottom padding added to the 2-columns class, what we'll do to separate this section from the last one is we'll just add an additional class here that we'll call last, so we can target this 2-columns class itself. So now let's add our first image, starting with our table row and table data tag, followed by the link and the image. And before we add the image and its width, let's close out the tags here. So we'll close out the table tag for the column, and then I'll add some space here to close out the 2-columns table data tag, the table row, then the table, whoops, I'll correct that. So the table, and then we have the table data and table row tag last. Okay, and then what we can do is simply copy this column for the second column with the additional image. And now we can add the images, and each one will display at 300 pixels. So we'll add the IMG folder, followed by email-1.jpg. Then we can give it its width of 300 pixels. And we'll also add max width of 300 pixels. And now if we save it, we'll have our first image displaying. And what we can do is simply copy this link with the image inside of it and paste it underneath, then just change the image file to email2.jpg. So as I mentioned, we have some padding on the top and bottom of this section to correct, but before we do that, let's add the background color to match the image to fill in the white space around it, and we'll add the border on top of it as well. So let's add some inline styling to the first table data tag here. So we'll write style, and let's give it the same background color that we used for the social media icons, which is EAF6FB for the hex value. Then we can add the border that appears at the top of the section with border-top, and we'll make it 2 pixels solid, then the turquoise hex value of 21C6B8. Okay, so once we save it, we have our background color matching the background of the images as well as the border up top. And now to get rid of the space on the top and bottom to match the original, let's reference the last class following the 2-columns class in our CSS. So we'll write 2columns.last. We'll start with padding top 0. Then to make sure that it overrides the padding top added previously to the 2-columns class, we'll add exclamation point important. And actually we can just do padding all around instead of just doing padding top, because we're not going to want padding on any side. So padding 0 important, and now we're not going to see it take effect. We need to just remove the space in between the 2 columns and the last class because they're within the same element. So there we have our spacing corrected for the 2-columns icon or logo section, and we're ready to move on to the footer section of the template. Okay, so let's work our way back down towards the bottom of our index.html file to the footer section comment, and we can start off with a new set of table row and table data tags, in addition to the table tag, which will give a width of 100% to, once again. Then we'll add a new set of table row and table data tags so we can add styling around our image and text content in the footer. And we're ready to add our logo footer image right here. So let's once again start off with a link or a anchor text tag followed by the image tag. And I'm going to add a hashtag to leave the link blank and add img/HTML email white. And we're going to give this image a width of 230 pixels. And we're not going to be able to see it yet. So let's apply some styling so we can get the background color in addition to the border at the top of this section. So with the finished version, we have a border similar to the last section on the top, which is 2 pixels solid 21C 6B8 for the hex value. And then the background color for the footer section, we're just going to make a little bit darker of a gray with the color 565656 for the hex value. And then we'll also add a border to the very bottom of the section, similar to the top, just a little bit thicker. So we'll add border bottom 4 pixels, and I'll just change top to bottom. And now it looks pretty good, except for we'll want to center our text and image in addition to adding some space to the top and bottom of our content. So let's use the inner table data tag. Then I'll add padding top bottom of 50 pixels, and we'll add padding left right of 20 pixels to make sure that there's some space off to the side of our text and logo image on small screens. Then we can also use text align center to center the image in addition to the text. And we'll make our text the color white for when we get to our paragraph text. So I'll add color FFF, or 6 Fs rather, for the hex value. Okay, so now we're ready to add our text content underneath the logo image, starting with the W3Newbie HTML email paragraph text. So I'll add that inside of the P tag for paragraph. Okay, so once we save it, there we have our white paragraph text appearing. So we can add the new set of paragraph text, which includes the address. So I'm going to copy this paragraph and paste that underneath. And then I'm just going to copy this text to paste that in and replace the HTML email text. And now if we save it and take a look, it looks pretty good, except for I'm going to add some additional space underneath the logo by adding padding top to the paragraph text up top here. So let's add padding top 18 pixels and see how that looks. So that's going to be a little bit more space than the finished version, so I'll reduce it to 10 pixels. And that's pretty close. It's not exact, but that looks pretty good. You can reduce the padding a little bit more if you want to. Okay, so next let's add our email address, which will include a link. So we'll add paragraph text followed by a link inside of it. And we're going to use a mail to link to prompt an email service to open up. So if somebody clicks on the link, it's going to prompt them to send an email. And then we can add the actual text for the link inside of that. And we'll change the color of our links here in the footer in just a few minutes once we complete adding them. So we'll add the telephone link next, which will include a tel link to prompt a call when somebody clicks on the link, or FaceTime, for example, if they're on a Mac computer. And I'll add the actual telephone number text. Then lastly, we can add the unsubscribe text underneath that, which I'll just leave blank, and I'll write it in all caps. And this is going to be a little bit smaller in text size than the rest, so we'll make it 13 pixels in size. And now if we take a look, it looks good, except for, as I said, the text color for the links doesn't match up. So let's go back up to our CSS and reference the links with the A tag, and then we'll do away with the underline using text decoration none. And I'm going to give them a color of the hex value 37CBBF, which is a little bit darker of a turquoise shade, or lighter of a turquoise shade rather, that we've been using for the border. Okay, so now if we take a look, it's going to match up to the original aside from a little bit of the spacing differences that we added to the footer and the buttons. And now we can go about our last step, which is adding our media query CSS to change up the sizing of the columns once they drop down to the single column layout from the 2 columns. So as you may remember, we're going to get rid of the padding that we have set around our table column by referencing the same CSS that we added to the full width template. And I'm just going to correct the indentation here. And we're going to get rid of the padding all around by adding padding 0 ! Important. So now if we save it and take a look, we actually lost the padding to the top and bottom of our 2 columns. So let's just target the padding right and the padding left. So we can copy this and paste it underneath, then change right to left. And now if we save it, we see that our text is wider than the original that we had, but our image isn't as wide yet. So what we'll need to do is increase the size of the image. So what we'll do is target the 2 columns content class, which our image is inside of. So we can just copy this CSS and paste that inside of our media query. And I'm going to get rid of all of this style here and add IMG for the image inside of that class. Then set a width of 300 pixels for the image. And we're going to write ! Important as well, in addition to changing the maximum width. So if you remember, we have that set to 260 pixels, and we'll need to increase that to 300 pixels. And I'm also going to write ! Important to make sure that it overrides the 260 pixel amount. Okay, so once we save it with that, we have our increased images and text content for the 2 column section once we get down underneath the 600 pixel breakpoint. So with that, that concludes all of the coding of our HTML email template. So now we can go about testing it and sending it to our own email address to see how it appears in our inbox. So as I mentioned early on in the tutorial, I'm going to give you a resource to make your images live, because when we're testing our emails in email clients like Gmail, it's not going to be able to reach these local email files that we're linking to inside of the template right now. So I'll give you 2 really quick options, and the first is to use a website called imgbb.com, which is a free image hosting service where you can upload your images and get a direct link to the image where it's hosted live. This way, as I said, you can see your images displayed when we test our emails, which I'm going to show you how to do in just a minute. And then another resource that you could use is, let me just scroll up here to or scroll down to the social media icons, for example, is we can use placeholder images in place of the images replicating the size that we gave them. So if you do a Google search for placeholder image or go to placeholder.com, we can copy one of their image links. So I'll just copy this image address and then I'll paste that in, and we can change the dimensions of the image to 32 pixels by 32 pixels because our icons are square. Then go over here and we'll see the placeholder image display, which you'll also see display in Gmail when you're testing the appearance of your email template. Then once you're ready to start sending yourself test emails, you can go to putsmail.com, which you see here, and we can use their new test feature or use their inliner feature. So this will take our internal CSS in the head section of our template and move it inline. So if we just copy all of our HTML and paste that in, it'll inline the CSS for us. And all of this CSS, as I said, which we added internally, will now be inline inside of these table classes and so on. And we'll also have the option to inline our CSS when we send the actual test email. So if we go over to new test, I'm going to add a subject line here saying completed responsive HTML email. Then I'll paste in all of the email template code that we built in this tutorial and select move my CSS inline. Then I'm not a robot, and make sure you add your email address to receive the email. then I'll hit send. And once it's sent, we can go over to our email address, in my case, Gmail, to see that we have our responsive HTML email template displaying for us. Okay, so with that, I want to thank you for sticking around for this HTML email template tutorial. Please remember to check out my complete course, which you can see using the starter files link, or check out the link in the description of the video. And I thank you for watching.